Nussbaum, and I'm the Associate Director for Faith and Work Chicago. I'm so glad you joined us this Saturday morning for our spring event, Faith at Work in Chicago. And obviously, I'm sad that I can't be with you all this morning, but I'm praying that this time together will prompt new thinking for you. And of course, I hope that it will bear fruit in your life and in your work. The Academy Award-winning actor Michael Douglas was once interviewed about what it's like to make films in different cities around the country. And after reflecting on the question, Douglas had this to say. It's one of my favorite quotes. He said, "I'm impressed with the people of Chicago. New York is all talk, Hollywood is all hype, but Chicago is work." And for us, a gathered mass of Chicagoans who work in and around Chicago, that quote is worth reflecting on for a moment. It's actually kind of profound. Chicago is work. What Douglas was getting at, I think, is what we've all come to know as true as Chicagoans who work. The collective identity of our city is wrapped up in the idea of work. To be a person in Chicago is to be a person who works. Chicago's longest tenured leader, Mayor Richard J. Daley, famously referred to Chicago during his campaigns as the city that works. Working people going to work every day in the city that works. Yet we're also a gathered mass of Chicagoans who desire to follow Jesus and proclaim his likeness to our city. And so in this room are folks represented by various churches, various neighborhoods, various schools, and various workplaces. But we all have understood the call of Jesus from John chapter 12. If anyone serves me, they must follow me. And where I am, there my servant will be also. So what that logically suggests is that our work is implicated as we seek to follow Jesus. And I want us to consider that intersection throughout this morning, which is why we named this event what we did. Faith at Work in Chicago. What does it mean for us to be people of faith who go to work every single day in the city of Chicago? Most of us, if I had to guess, don't actually know how our faith connects to our work. Like we believe the right things, we show up to church, we earnestly want to follow Jesus. But then Monday morning comes around and it kind of feels like a completely different world. And maybe you felt that disconnect before too. Like, I want my faith to matter as it relates to my work, but I really just can't understand, or I don't know what it has to do with my job. So what I want to do for whatever season of work that you find yourself in this morning, whether you're just getting started with work, maybe you're early on in your career and you want to lay a strong foundation for work, or maybe you're in the midst of a season where you feel actually incredibly frustrated with your work. Or maybe you're navigating a moment where you're trying to discern what the future of your work ought to look like. What I want to do is have us just take a step back and consider for a moment what it means for us to be people of faith who are at work in the city of Chicago in this very moment in time in 2026. And I want that to inform how we think about the season that we're in. I actually think those three simple components, faith at work in Chicago, are far, far more connected than we tend to realize. And so with that in mind, I just want to do something really simple with our time. I don't want to give you a framework. I don't want to give you three simple steps. I just want to remind you of these things. What does it mean to be a person of faith? What does it mean to be a person who works? And what does it mean to do both of those things here in the city of Chicago? Okay, so number one, let me remind you what it means to be a person of faith. Because I think, and maybe I'm speaking for myself, I forget this more often than I realize. To be a Christian is not just to believe certain things about Jesus, it is to follow him with your entire life. It is to be his disciple. And that means that our faith is not just something we have, it's something that actually shapes who we are becoming. Jesus says in Luke chapter 9, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me." And not just the proverbial taking up of our cross, like in our minds, but the actual following of Jesus with our entire lives. So let me ask you a simple question this morning. If you are a follower of Jesus, where does that actually show up in your life daily, as he suggested in Luke chapter 9? Because it has to show up somewhere. It's not just a thought exercise, our faith. And for most of us, if we think about it, the honest answer is, well, it should show up at my work. That's where we deal with pressure, where we navigate ambiguity, where we encounter sin, where we interact with people who are hard to love. That's not separate from our discipleship. That is our discipleship. The great Chicago radio host Studs Terkel once said that work is about a search for daily meaning as well as a search for daily bread. And I actually think it's a funny quote, but it prompts an important theological reflection for us to consider. We don't just want a paycheck. We want our work to matter and be as much a part of our spiritual formation as our community groups or our personal devotional time in the mornings. And what the gospel story, as well as the witness of church history, would suggest is that work does matter. Work is the arena in which we learn to do things like love our neighbors, practice integrity, become more like Jesus. So just as a simple reminder for us, your job is not outside of your faith. It actually is one of the primary places where our faith is formed. Second reminder for this morning, let me remind you what it means to be a person of faith who works. Because we tend to get this wrong in a couple different directions. On one side, some of us make our work our everything. And then on the other side, some of us treat it like, we treat our work like it's almost nothing. But the biblical story gives us a vision for work that's actually far better than either of those ends of the spectrum. The book of Genesis obviously suggests that work is part of creation. You were made to build, you were made to create, you were made to contribute. The British theologian Oliver O'Donovan helps put language to this. He says, work is the way in which we respond to the world that God has made. And he goes on to say, learning to work is a reflective learning of what is involved in existing as humans. We learn to love, we learn to forgive, to endure suffering, and to hope. And learning to work is like these things. So work isn't just climbing the ladder. It's not just making money, or it's not even just living out your passion. It's actually a faithful response, a response to the world that God has made with order and purpose. And our work is a profound way in which we step into that. We bring order where there's chaos. We build things that are useful and create flourishing. We contribute to the common good of our culture and our city. That's actually what work is for. But we all know that that's like not the full story of how it actually feels day to day, because work is also incredibly frustrating. Things don't go the way they should. People don't act the way they should. You don't always act the way that we should, or you should. I don't always act the way I should. So we live in this tension where work should be a purpose-filled response, and yet work is also a frustration-filled reality. And again, if you live in Chicago, you feel that all the time. This is not a city that lets you feel casually about your work, but it's also a city that drives you to feel incredibly busy with your work. As Michael Douglas said, Chicago is work. That's not just a clever quote. It's something that we feel every single day in our bones. This is a city where people show up and roll up their sleeves. People labor diligently for decades. People take their craft seriously. And that is a good thing, but here's what we need to remember. Work is not a savior. It can't actually carry that weight for us, but it's also not meaningless. It's something that God uses even when you're on those days where we're waiting on a blue line platform in the middle of winter wondering why we have to go into the office today. On those days when we have to submit yet another unnecessary expense report, even when we have to put out some fire that our coworker just started, even when you're doing really well, actually, and you just received a year-end bonus. It's in all of those moments that work is a response to what God is already doing in the world. And finally, the third reminder I want to give you, and our final reminder I want to give you is I guess I'll start with a question. Have we considered the importance of where it is that we work? Where you live is shaping you. Cities are not neutral, is something Tim Keller used to say. They have the power to dictate our spiritual formation. And I think Chicago forms people in very particular ways. Carl Sandburg once called Chicago the hog butcher for the world, the tool maker, the stacker of wheat, player with railroads and the nation's freight handler, stormy, husky, brawling, city of the big shoulders. What he's saying is that this is a city that has always and will continue to value grit and hard work, competence and sensibility, and getting things done. And honestly, that's a gift. Like, that's been a gift in my life. But I think there's another layer to Chicago as well. It's sort of civic culture that's just as important. It's something about our Midwestern hospitality, our sense of civic duty, and the rich history of philanthropy and promoting the common good that is also in the Chicagoans' DNA. The great Chicagoan Jane Addams once said that the good that we secure for ourselves is precarious until it is secured for all. That's wonderful. This city forms us to work hard and build incredible things, to make no little plans, but it also forms us to care for our neighbors and not stick our heads in the sand when issues arise. It forms us to fight back against the cold each winter and yet celebrate the warmth of summer. It forms us to share meals with one another and yet also to wrestle with dramatic paradoxes of wealth and poverty. It forms us to be proud and bold, but it also forms us to know tragedy and heartbreak. So now here's the question I think we all have to wrestle with this morning. What is all of this, being working people in Chicago, doing to us? I suppose what I want to suggest to each of you this morning is that perhaps God is using your work in Chicago to form you into the disciple that he desires for you to be. And this means that you can work hard in Chicago without being consumed by your work. You can pursue excellence in the common good without being defined or consumed by it. And you can stay engaged in your work without losing your soul. And here's the really good news. God is not absent from our work here in Chicago. He's using work, all kinds of work in this city to form us, to shape us, to make us more like Christ. So your work is not just about what you produce, it's actually about who you are becoming. And so let me just leave you with this, a simple set of reminders to recap. Remember what it means to be a person of faith. Remember what it means to be a person who works. And remember what it means to be and do both of those things here in Chicago. And so maybe the question to carry with you this week is this. What is God already doing in and through your work in Chicago? And as a result, who are you becoming? And how might you respond to what God is already doing? It ought to be noteworthy to us that Jesus called the disciples to follow him while they were at the end of a workday on the lakeside. It was essentially their office place. The only thing the disciples could do was respond to Jesus' call to follow him. And perhaps it's not much different for us as Chicagoans here at the end of a long work week on the shores of Lake Michigan. Jesus has called us to be disciples, his disciples, and as a result, our work is implicated. The question is, how are we going to respond?